Everyone, welcome. We'll get started in just a minute here. While we're waiting on some people to join, why don't you share where you're joining us from? All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Just a couple housekeeping things before we turn it over to Matt and Mike. Welcome to Office Hours. We do this every first Wednesday of the month so that we can basically open our doors to say, hey, if you have any questions, if you're stuck at all with Office 365 and you need some help, you're welcome to join and ask any questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to get you unstuck. So this is a pretty free-form meeting. We used to kind of set up a couple questions ahead of time, but we've had enough people keep us busy with all the questions live that we don't do that anymore. But we are streaming to both YouTube and Microsoft Teams. So for those of you on Teams, if you prefer to ask your question over audio, you're welcome to raise your hand and we can allow you to unmute and chat with you there. But otherwise, feel free to drop any questions that you have in chat. I think that's all that we have before we turn it over. So, Matt and Mike, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and we'll get started.
I'm Mike. This is Matt.
That's great.
We're ready to go. I'm super excited about this first question that we have because it's a deep one, and we could spend a lot of time on it, so we'll see where it goes.
You want to just get started right into it?
Yeah, let's just jump right in. So Rachel says she's not able to join, but her question is, what is our preferred method of development, waterfall or agile, so type of project methodology, and what are our favorite dev methodology resources to learn from? So my quick answer to the first part of that question is agile 100% of the time. I love agile. It's way better than waterfall. I've done both types of projects in the past. I think, Matt, you have too. I think one of the things I don't like about waterfall is there's a lot of sitting around and waiting to actually do something. And you spend a lot of time, in what I might consider to be analysis paralysis. It just feels like that, even though maybe things are moving forward. So that would be one of the reasons that I prefer agile.
Yeah, so for me, it's the same thing, agile. We've been involved in both types of methodology. I think something that is really, so in particular, you talked about dev methodologies of how to develop products or solutions or anything. That is a topic that I could talk about for a very long time. Specific to agile and waterfall, it's really it's not that simple. As Mike said, we've been involved with waterfall style projects and agile style projects, but like, I don't think I've ever done a project where it's really been 100% agile or 100% waterfall. It's always been some sort of mix. And, you know, the reality is that agile, what the benefits that you get from being agile and doing an agile project are just great. And there's something that we lean way heavily in that way. Some of that is, like I said before, we don't necessarily follow all of the agile methodologies. We take liberties with some of the details of how it's done, but getting something in somebody's hands early, not trying to eat it all at once, doing as part of our agile methodology, having a high-level agreement up front, so having a goal, a focus, a strategy for where you're headed, those are all really important to us, and there's reasons why they are some of the reasons why we're successful in delivering projects, I believe, right?
And the other thing I would add to that is we've had several conversations in the past, I think on our podcast maybe, and even probably in some of our YouTube videos, where we've talked about some of the benefits of using a tool like Power Apps, so no code, low code, in that process of agile development. So in a couple different ways. One is, even if you think you're going to build a completely custom software product or tool, you can still use something like Power Apps to rapidly prototype it and get it in front of people and see if they're going to like it and what the user experience is going to be like and what things might need to change to fit the process better. But then in and of itself, just using Power Apps to build solutions as a faster tool, it's a quicker way to get something in front of people. So it enhances that agile methodology, if you will.
Yeah, and for us, just generally speaking, we want to keep the focus on the outcomes, the business outcomes for the customer or for who you're developing something for, and less on, all of the nitty-gritty details about how that is all going to be done up front, which Agile can help you with, because you can be focused on specific tasks up front with a higher goal or objective towards the end, or like as the outcome.
I'll also say it helps to have your dev team well connected with your product ownership team or your end users, so that you can have effective communication, like that's quick and clear and all of those types of things. If your teams are very disconnected, that can be somewhat of a challenge. But that that communication is key. So you're handing something off for somebody to review, getting quick feedback that makes sense, having the ability to jump on a virtual meeting or in a room with somebody to talk about that particular feature or the shortcomings or the things that need to change, makes that whole process more effective.
And having a strong project manager or delivery lead or delivery manager, whatever, there's lots of different names people have for them, but someone who's running the role that doesn't have a vested interest in the product outcome or in the way certain things are done, the technical end of things, to be the person that is keeping everybody on track, keeping them doing what they're supposed to do, and keeping things consistent. The second part of the question was about favorite dev methodology resources. I think that's a challenging question for us in particular. We've been doing this quite a long time. We, especially in our current roles, we have a delivery lead within our organization who is responsible for helping us define the methodologies that we're going to use. And so we lean heavily on those types of resources, so internal resources to define what that's going to be. As far as, beyond that or outside of that, there's a number of technical resources that I have personally taken a look at over the years to kind of get an understanding about the difference and why one would be the other. When Scrum, Scrum was agile, water-gile, like all of these things. I don't know that there's one particular resource that I would say that I've just used completely, but there have been a number over the years that I have looked at. And now, generally speaking, unless the customer is requiring us to follow a particular strategy or methodology, we're in control of that. And so, we have someone, a role within our organization that's helping manage and maintain and be a thought leader in that space.
Yep. Not only a role, but we also have preferred tools that we like to use, right?
Correct. Yep.
Git or Azure DevOps, as just ways to manage our tasks. It depends on the type of project that it is, but if we're doing, if we're building .NET code, chances are we're doing it inside of an Azure DevOps team or project,
yeah.
And maybe checking source code into a Git repository. We have a couple different ways that we like to do that, and there are all kinds of resources out there on the internet to help you learn how to use those types of tools. And when it comes to Power Platform, that type of stuff is somewhat new. There are some methods and sort of built tools that you can use and wire up to facilitate, managing projects and components in that way, components of your solution. So the COE toolkit has some stuff built into it for managing app dev lifecycle for no code, low code. So that would be some stuff that I would encourage you to look at. And then I think the other thing that I would say is, Matt, you said we've been doing this for a really long time. One of the best resources that I have learned from is just having access to and being around highly motivated and skilled delivery leads, right?
Yep.
People that inspire good work, inspire, on time, on budget, people who are really,
Who aren't afraid to say, hey, you're doing it wrong.
Yep.
We should be doing this, or to say, this is how we've done it before, we should do it this way.
right? Because I'm a developer, like that's my training, that's your training. We like problem solving and that kind of stuff. And so that dev lifecycle, like we know how to use all the parts and pieces and tools and that kind of stuff, but having somebody that kind of knows the ropes, the ins and outs and the gotchas of actually delivering something, having that quality resource to tap for that type of thing is just really a great resource.
So I see another question from YouTube. YJH passed the MB 910, which is the functional dynamics test, I think. So congratulations. How much learning curve towards master Power Apps, say at a level with income generating? So I got your question all the way up to the point where you said, say at a level with income generating. I don't know exactly what you were going for there, whether or not that would mean like generating income from being employed by somebody, or whether or not that, once you get the master Power Apps, what you're looking to do. That's not quite clear to me based on your question. I would say there's a lot to learn. Honestly, the Power Apps environments are incredibly complicated, and there's a lot of space there to learn. It covers everything from very basic, Power Apps, Power Automates that you can build, all the way up to something that is, very intricate. As you were going through with Dynamics, Dynamics is largely built on the Power Platform and Power Apps, Power Automate, etc. And it's incredibly complicated. There's a lot going on there. There's lots of options, lots of settings. So there's a huge learning curve towards if you were to look to get that. And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the last little bit.
So I think there's a bit of a difference, right? Obviously, the MB 910 I think is geared toward learning the product, right? The Dynamics product and the different
specifically, yeah.
Parts and pieces of it and how it works to do its job. When it comes to Power Apps and becoming a master or somebody who develops Power Apps or model-driven apps or Canvas apps, it's a bit of a different type of content. It's going to be much more dev-centered. It is no-code, low-code, so it's not computer science at its core. So it's not as advanced as that, but it's definitely more dev-centric. And as Matt kind of alluded to, there's a very broad range of topics that you can get into, things that you can dive into when it comes to Power Apps and Power Automate. And then beyond that, it can go very deep, right? You can do quite a bit with those tools. And I would say that honestly, there's a great career there if that's something that you want to pursue. I think that's very in demand right now. Everybody is trying to figure out how to build Power Apps in their organization. So I would encourage you to pursue that. Dynamics, as Matt mentioned, is kind of built on top of Power Apps. They are all basically model-driven apps at the base level, at its core. So that might be an area to start. Would be model-driven apps if you're inspired or you have a good understanding of that Dynamics world already.
Cool.
Right.
We didn't see anything back from YJH. I don't see anything else in the other chat, so I think we can hang out for a minute.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll give a prompt just maybe to get people thinking. If you look into your future a year from now, things that you wish that you had in your organization, but somewhere that you're heading, what is preventing you from getting there today? And is there anything that, any questions that you have associated with that?
While we're waiting, Matt, what's the most interesting thing that you've worked on in the last week?
Oh, interesting. That word is interesting. I would say we have been doing some work with a customer on governance around Power Platform. And some of the work that we've been doing in the last week related to understanding how environments work, dev, test, prod, ALM, at the enterprise scale, has been interesting for me. I've done quite a bit of research on that, thinking about that, and also thinking a lot about how to take this supposedly extremely simple, but actually really, really complicated technology, Power Platform, and translating it into something that you can present to, mid-level or even executive leaders, and they'll understand. So a lot of work around that it's been interesting.
Yeah. That is interesting.
I've tried it a couple different ways now.
Yeah.
To a couple different audiences, and it still, I think what Microsoft does has some merit. I think what some other people have done, but I don't think anybody has found a good way to really explain it, because honestly, it's hard. It's hard to do.
When we get into that governance discussion with our customers, do you find that, generally speaking, organizations try to limit access to these new tools? One of the underpinnings of the Power Platform is that it's more accessible for people to build apps and stuff like that.
Yep.
Do you find that once organizations recognize what they have sitting there, that they try to then restrict or limit access to it, or do they generally let it go?
So I would say that it depends on the organization and depends on who you're talking to. Especially for larger organizations, compliance officers, security officers, IT in general is very not cool with it.
They want to lock it down. Yep.
Executive level, thought leaders, either because they have heard the terms low code, no code, and they think they should be doing it, or because they actually understand it, they have a tendency to be like, I want to leverage this, right? I want my team to be able to figure this out and get benefits from it. So
yeah.
I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag in regards to what organizations do. I think if I have learned anything in the last 6 months to a year related to this particular topic, it is that the ecosystem that exists today, including Microsoft, of all of the vendors that can do this stuff, need to do better at providing ways to make it easy for people to use and for it to be address the compliance and security concerns that
for the organizations
have.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Looks like we do have another question from Tanya. She's looking for any resources related to adjusting the template size of a gallery inside containers to make a grid that is uniform squares. So 4 items to display, so 2 by 2.
Yep. I'm creating an example right now.
Awesome. All right, I see another question from YJH, but we'll get to that one in a second.
Okay. So, Mitch, I don't know if you can make sure that my screen's shared.
You're up.
So you're saying to make a grid that's uniform squares, only 4 items to display. So, Tanya, if you want to come off mute, I'm sure we can allow you to do that, and you could explain it to me. Otherwise, you can also type it here. I'm assuming that you're going to mean like 4 in a grid layout is what I'm assuming you mean. That makes sense, Mike? Do you agree with that?
I think if I had to interpret what she's asking, I've got 4 items to display, and I want them to show up 1, 2, 3, 4. Right?
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So this would be an example, I think. And then the template size is, I'm not exactly, the template size is dependent on the type of layout that you have. So in this case, my template size is 160 right now. And that template size, when you look at this is self height minus 60 with a minimum of 160. So I think right now, if I remember right, this one's set to 160, which is this. You can make it whatever you want, and the best way to do this would be to make it based on the height. So much like what this is doing. So in this case, if I wanted to make this square, I would probably do self height divided by 2 or something, probably. And there you end up with
Yep. So the
grid
one
like
other
this.
thing, I think that's a good example. Hopefully that answers her question.
Mhm.
The one other thing about that layout that you just created is share with folks the property that you use to get the horizontal.
grid.
Grid.
The grid.
Yep.
So when you insert, you can choose a vertical gallery, or if you go down to, I don't know where it is, down in here somewhere. Actually, you can do vertical grids, you can do flexible height grids, you can do a bunch of different grids. And that's awesome. But you need to realize these are just quick settings. So you can switch them between the two, which in this case, where is it? Is it called orientation, Mike, or is it?
It was on the tip of my tongue, and I can't remember it, and that's why I asked
Why you asked? Yeah, it's right
'cause
here. I
wanted to
just got to
remember
look at it. It's somewhere in here.
Is it like number of columns or something like that?
No, number of columns is what I changed to make it go right to left, but I
Yep.
thought for sure that you could switch it between the two. Maybe you can't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought you could. I thought you could switch it from one to the other.
So I think that number of columns is the one I was looking for.
Oh,
Right.
The number of columns is how you make it so that so if you change it, so the number of columns is like, if I want to change this, it's not the same though. Here, I'm going to duplicate the screen. So number of columns just means the number of columns before it wraps. If I insert a horizontal gallery instead of a vertical gallery, you can see, this is going to the right, instead
Right.
of up and down, right? But this also has a number of, should also have a wrap count, which right now it's only at 1. You can say out every 2, and you end up with something
There you
very
go.
similar.
Yep. Wrap
The
count.
difference, though, is that this, so if I go back to, I think it adds this, on start. So let me go to the on start quick. If I go here, no, where did it create it? Let me go here, advanced. Yeah, so I think it is, where is it again? So if I had another row, because I can't remember where this data source gets created when they create these gallery templates, but if I had another one here, it would extend out to the right. So you would get a scroll bar going this way on this page, and on this one, actually I'm on the top one, so it would go down, and on this one it would go up.
Gotcha.
this one would go up and down. This one would go right and left. Is basically the difference between the two. But the specific to what Tanya was asking, which I'm just not sure whether or not we answered it completely. This, if I change the template size on this one, and I did. You can see that I would want to do the width divided by 2 because again, this is going in this orientation. So this is a horizontal versus a vertical gallery. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, Tanya. If I didn't, please ask another one, clarify it, or feel free to come off mute and we can answer some more.
Sounds good.
Otherwise, I think that's it.
All right, next question, YJH. And we might need a little bit of clarification on this one. Where do you think the good working environment to allow Power Apps to grow and thrive? And do we have an example? I think that's could be a pretty broad question. If you want to provide some additional clarification for that, that would probably be helpful. But in terms of like a good environment for
what type of organization?
Yeah, it could be what type of organization. It could be the type of people or the culture. I think like one of the things that we've seen is if you have people who are driven to make something better at their workplace, like they will dig in and figure some stuff out. And often they're not given the resources. And so they just go figure stuff out on their own. And so in that regard, you have to kind of give people freedom to do that, freedom to innovate and things like that. And that kind of dovetails into the last topic we were talking about organizations realizing the risk that they may have with Power Platform just being turned on, and then trying to mitigate that risk and limit access to those tools. And so oftentimes we find ourselves operating on the edge, right? Obviously within our organization, we allow ourselves to do what we want to do. But for many of the customers that we work with, we tend to operate in a space that's just a little bit ahead of where the organization is. And so we'll often have access to resources that not everyone else does have access to. And we kind of blaze a trail in that way and play the role of the innovator. But we have a lot of experience to draw from and know how to kind of generally keep ourselves out of trouble for the most part.
So if I were to try to give you some, I start working with a company and I learn more about them and, what are some signs or some signals to me that tells me, hey, Power Apps, Power Automate, the low-code, no-code solutions are something that might be valuable. It would be things like people are running Excel spreadsheets that manage a bunch of business processes, business data. You've got people who have used SharePoint extensively to build, applications and flows, but they've not really, branched out and actually created applications. So that would be a scenario that I'm looking at end users and what they're doing. On the other end, I'm looking at a development team, and we're talking to a development team who is strapped, right? It has no time to deliver on everything that is there. They're delivering on the enterprise level solutions that everybody needs, but then, I need this thing really quick to help with my one problem. That is not getting done, right? It's falling off the list. It's being at the bottom of the list because oftentimes those things are things that could be done pretty easily and are well suited to the Power Platform. So
cool.
I just realized I missed
scrolling down
some of this context. The Teams window doesn't update unless it's focused. So sorry to Tanya. We just are seeing your pictures that you sent right now. So feel free to tag on whatever answer.
That's why we got to join the team, Mitch.
Yeah.
All right. So when she's editing the app, she's got squares, but then when she goes to viewing it, it goes to rectangles.
Okay. Got it. You can't control the width. That is true. You cannot. You can only control one or the other. So in this particular case, you're dealing with a yes. So in this particular case, you're dealing, I think, with something that will never scroll. I think. Like I don't know. You'd have to answer that question in Teams chat. But I don't think this is something that would scroll right or left. and you just want it to show those 4 things without scrolling and
So I
the
have-
square
I have a thought.
thing. Yeah.
I'm just in my mind piecing together how I would maybe build that, because you're going to have like tablet or desktop, landscape or portrait, right, which is going to control your height and width overall of the app. Could you build an absolutely sized container inside and then position that container based on size of the app, right? So position it in the middle, let's say your desktop or your landscape layout, position it in the middle and then stick your gallery inside of that container.
Yes, you could, but you don't necessarily need a container to do that, because you could also just make the size of the gallery always square. Which is what I was going to suggest, is that if you make the size of the gallery fixed, that will solve your problem. Your bigger problem may be that I don't know whether or not you're doing this, Tanya, but if you're trying to do dynamically sized, so you want to be able to be responsive and work in smaller size screens and larger size screens, then it becomes a little bit more challenging. The solution in a lot of ways in that regard would be to do a fixed size, but do that size in a, make it always a ratio, is basically what I would do. Hopefully that helps, Tanya. I can, if you want, if it would help, I can kind of show what I think that you're talking about right here, I think. So in your case, you've got a fixed size, and we'll do, so in your case, what I think you have, I'm trying to be dynamic, but it's actually ending up more relative. I'm missing something for dynamic. So when you say you're trying to be dynamic, are you currently adjusting the screen size? So when you look at the size of a screen, you're adjusting the screen size to be dynamic? Or did you set, I think it's under settings, display, scale.
Gallery size is parent.
Did you lock
times 90%?
9? Yeah, but did you turn off this lock aspect ratio so that it scales to fit? Like, is that what's going on? Because usually, if you lock the aspect ratio and you scale to fit, it's off. Yep. So then, what's going to happen is, like, if I play this, it's going to come up to as big as I want it to be, right? Like it's gonna expand with my screen. And what happens is if I, so it looked like in your case you had like a footer and a header. So let me, you're moving around on me. Scale to fit is off. Oh, is off. Okay. Lock aspect ratio is off. So
I do want to say, Tanya, we did allow your mic in case it's easier for you to come off mute. You're welcome to do that.
So you're saying you've got scale fit off and you've got lock orientation off. So when you play, you're getting this. So it's full. It goes full basically. And that is your problem, 100%. And I would say that your real problem is that. Let's see if I can adjust. I'm going to think about how I can simulate it without spending a ton of time. Let's do it like this. Let's do your height. I'm going to do height and width. So I'm going to do my width of parent dot width times 90%. I'm going to do my height to height. Okay. And then I'm going to make it, I don't know, 10 and 10.
Which you could
so
relatively position as well if you wanted to, right?
Correct, yep. But what you're saying is, like, when you do this, it's not the same ratio, right? Like, that's the problem, I think you're saying. And so your real problem is that this thing isn't square. And so this is the problem. Because you can only control, like, on this template size, this is a vertical template, so it's only going to control the height of the rows. To control the width, you need to basically adjust it to be the same. So one way you could do that would be to say, there's a couple different ways to do it. One would be to say, min. Something like this. And then something like this. Except for I think I've got to do, let me bring this up here. 690. I don't know why it's 690. Oh, because of the height, because that's 90% of the height. Yeah, so like this will make it square. And so doing this will force this to be a square layout, and it'll always be square. Does that make sense? Does that make it more sense, Tanya?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've just been experimenting so much. I think I've gotten lost trying to get it. So
yeah. So the key, like I said, is because of what you're
and you're
using.
on the gallery.
Yeah, I'm on the gallery. It in your case, you could, if you're, you said something about you're filling the container. So if you're making it fill the container, you could do it on the container too. But the point is that the gallery has to be square for the template to be square. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
And so
I just
basically,
didn't know how they connected. So
yeah, and so basically if you do like this, min, between the two, you're gonna take the smallest of the two and it'll be square. So like, Mitch, if you scroll up so I can see what her other image was. So yeah, that one. So like in the one that you showed second, where it's not the right orientation, if the width was smaller, excuse me, because the overall width was the same as the height, then you'd be good.
and see the rectangle. I mean, shifts also. So it's almost like it's breaking in both directions because the content isn't centered in the highlighted area when you hover.
Yeah, so I don't know, like, it overall is not. If I had to guess, I would say that you're not positioning these relative. So like this, so for example, this guy, when I look at how this one has been set up for its position, this, if I can find it, the X and Y, this is parent.template height divided by 2 minus self.height divided by 2. So you need to make sure that you're doing this type of thing for the elements inside as well. Because I don't, based on what I'm seeing, what you have, I don't think the interior text is being relatively set to where the content is within it. At least that's what I think. I can't really tell 100% from what you're showing.
Horizontally it may be, but I'm not sure about vertically.
Yes. Or if it is, it's not quite right. Like I'd need to know more about what the makeup of it is. But I think there's two things. The first one is you need to get the squares to be square, so the components or the items. And to do that, you need to make sure the height and the width of the gallery is the same. And then the second piece is I would mess with the individual positioning of these to make sure they're relative. Like for example, that top one. I don't know if you can share, but or if you can tell me, but I would love to know what the Y value of that is. You know, it should be something like, you know.
It's the image below it's Y minus the height of itself minus 3 to get the spacing.
The image below it. Well, that's interesting. If it's a gallery, it would.
I want it centered. I want it centered over the image.
The words.
Yep.
And the words are separate from the image?
Yes.
Got it. So then what I think the real problem is right now is this is all working right. This is working correct. But the new problem you have is in this particular format, the size of the image needs to actually be smaller to fit. So your real problem is the image is centered in all cases, but you have such a small square, the text is now not right. Does that make sense? And that makes sense as to why it's a problem. So what I'm hearing you say is you center the image in the center of the square or of the template, right? But then you offset the H helper based on the position of the image, which is fine. But in this case, the overall height of that square is too small for the overall image. So what I would probably do is change the size of the image to be relative to the width or the height, whichever one, the size of the container. So on this particular one, all of your images would be 50 pixels smaller or 20 pixels smaller, which would then make your helper fit in the right spot. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
It's pretty. All of this is pretty. It's not necessarily complicated, but it takes a lot to think it through because it's all relative to something else.
Yeah, exactly. That theory of relativity.
Yep.
Yep, the cascading effect.
Cool. So hopefully that helps. If you try it out and it doesn't work, feel free to come back and ask us again.
All right, so we have another question from Charles. This is a good one. He's new to Power Apps, and he wants to connect 2 Azure tenants at the same time to get user information. Can you do that? So off the top of my head, I have not done that. I do know that you can set up an Azure AD trust. It requires both parties, both of the organizations to agree to that trust, and then that you can allow your users to access content or data either in both tenants or one in the other as one thing to do. So that would be place number one to start, right?
Well, first, place number one is if you're talking Power Apps, the answer is no. There's pretty much no way in Power Apps.
So even after you did that Azure AD trust.
So if you did an Azure AD trust, you don't have to connect to 2 Azure tenants. You just connect to your tenant.
Right. So when you're using the users,
and it wouldn't actually be a trust because you can't do trusts in Azure. You can only that's a on-premise thing. So in that case, what you would do is you would have a relationship between the 2 tenants, and you would a B2B connection.
Yep, B2B,
and you would allow
that's what it's
yourself
called.
to add users from their tenant into your tenant.
So the question then is, if I'm in Power Apps and I'm using the Office 365 users connector,
Yeah, you would be able to get to them.
you would be able to get to all the users in both.
But that's not technically getting to the Azure, their tenant stuff. So it gets really detailed really quick. The question is, why are you doing that? If you need the Azure ID?
And if I'm not mistaken, when you configure that B2B connection, you can be as explicit as you need to be in terms of what resources are accessible.
Yeah, you can. Well,
right, across the
as
tenants.
you need to be is a question.
I mean, it's a lot of work.
People come up with ridiculous requirements all the time. But yes, you can be specific about what is available. But it's not really the same as what I think it was Samantha, right?
No, Charles is asking this question.
Okay, Charles. It's not. I don't know that it's exactly what Charles was asking about. But you're 100% right. That is a way to do it. That's a tenant level, tenant administration, to basically set up a B2B, and then you add users from the one into the other, and then you've got that connection.
Okay.
Other than that, Power Apps in particular, you can't. Because Power Apps, you can't impersonate a different user. It's not like I can connect to a different tenant, right? Power Automate, on the other hand, is not necessarily the same. So with Power Automate, I think there are some options potentially to do something with Graph, to do something with one of these other connectors, to use a connector that would go across tenants. I've done it with Azure Automation. I've done it with Azure Flow. I think if you really have to get stuff from a different tenant and you don't want to create a late relationship, I think there is a way to do it. It's not going to be super basic and super simple, right?
Yep.
It'll be
so a lot of
if you want it from a Power App, you're going to be calling a flow.
A lot of the decision about how you might go about something like that would have to do with the relationship between the actual organizations and whether or not they're willing to have a B2B connector, whether or not they're willing to open up certain things.
If that gives you the right data, not everything comes between a B2B, right? If you're looking for data that is not available through the B2B connection, then that won't work either. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to do.
Okay, cool. Charles, if that answered your question, let us know, or if it didn't, feel free to clarify your question. Another question from Sadiq. He's asking about the limitations of adaptive cards compared to approvals, which is the first part of his question. Then he followed it up with how to upload files from an adaptive card. So as far as I know, there is no way to upload files from adaptive cards. I haven't found it.
I think that was a Mitch. Mitch should respond to that, isn't he? Didn't he try doing that just recently?
We just recorded a video
Well,
with Mike.
Yes, we recorded a video on adaptive cards, but it had no file upload.
Right, I know.
In
Weren't
your
you the one doing
scenario,
you were trying to do it, right?
so he's displaying images or files to the user in Teams using an adaptive card.
Oh, okay. So that's different.
Right. So,
okay.
so technically he's uploading a file somewhere, but it's not coming from the adaptive
Yeah,
card.
it's
from the
coming
form.
from
So as
somewhere
far as
else.
I know, there's no action set or control that you can add to an adaptive card that will allow you to do a file upload. In
But you could
terms
have a
of the
link or
differences
something
between
to do it.
adaptive cards and approvals, I think the biggest difference is approvals really puts you inside of a very tight box, if you will, if you're using the out-of-the-box approvals that you get with Office 365. There are limitations. For example, the comments on an approval can only be 256 characters long. And in order, you can do custom approvals, so you can do, accept or deny, or you can do, option 1, option 2, option 3. There are different things you can do there with approvals. You have things like that approvals are good for, like I need everyone to respond to this before we can move on,
Yeah.
right? Which you're not necessarily going to get with adaptive cards, so that would be another
So,
area.
I want to hear from you about what is going on with this.
Yeah.
How would you use an adaptive card to do approvals?
So when it comes to approvals in Office 365, I want to say approvals, the concept, right? There's 3 different ways. There's like email with action.
Yep.
People use that, right? Which
Yes,
people
has
have
its
used it to do
problems,
that.
yep.
There's approvals, which is like an actual
Yep.
kind of an audit trail,
Yeah.
of a response, right? And it's
Yep.
a
It's
specific
an
thing.
actual
It's
application
assigned to somebody.
for approvals,
It's a
yep.
dedicated application for approvals. All of that stuff lives inside of Dataverse.
Yep.
And then there's adaptive cards, and adaptive cards are basically, in the case of Office 365, the easy way to think of it is I create an adaptive card that's got a question for somebody. Here's the information you need to review, maybe a link to something
Yeah.
somewhere.
Take an action.
We then post that in Teams, and
Yeah.
we give them an action to take in that item.
So it's like email with approvals.
It's like email
Yeah.
with an action.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So
That's what
and
I
you can capture input. They can put comments
Yeah.
in. The nice thing about the adaptive cards that I like for approvals is that you can stick it into a Teams chat or channel, and the people who are involved in that engagement, whatever that approval might be or that interaction, can actually have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Right? And then they can resolve it right there in Teams. And then when they actually respond in the adaptive card, you can go check whatever box you need to in Dataverse or in some other data system where you're tracking the status of that item.
So that's what I thought it was, but I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I was missing something. So the only thing I would say about it is that it is not adaptive cards is not an approvals thing. You can build approvals with adaptive cards, but it is not built to do approvals. Like it's meant to be send a user something.
Adaptive
and click
cards
a
is
button.
meant to be anything.
Yeah, yes,
right?
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a very generic tool. So if you want to use it for approvals, you're responsible
You
for
have
all
to
the other
design
stuff,
the approval.
right? You have to
You-
do all of the other
right,
things, right?
right.
Um,
But what I found is in my use of approvals, especially if you get into more complex scenarios, where you need, in particular, you need more information in a response to the approval.
mhm.
That's where an adaptive card can be very handy. And you can work them together in conjunction with one another, because there's no reason that you can't post an adaptive card and say, will you please approve this? And then take that response to that adaptive card and apply it to the approval in question, right? You just have to do the extra work to do that.
Yep. Cool.
We have one more question on YouTube from YJH, and then we'll get back to the team's questions.
After finish the classes in your website, what are the best practices would help efficiently pass the apprentice stage to independent productivity level?
So to me, it sounds like YJH is looking for, hey, I'm going to go learn all this stuff. I'm going to consume all this content. How do I know that I'm ready to get a job
Yeah.
doing this stuff?
Yeah.
What I would tell you is you should, if you're interested in this stuff, seek out an employer who's willing to let you learn on the job. There's no better way to learn than on the job with other people who are seasoned and experienced and can, kind of help teach you and lead you. That's how I learned. That's how Matt learned it. We're talking years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I would suggest to you. I would not wait until you think you're at some level. I would try to jump right in, find a place.
Yeah, so I agree with Mike. I would try to find a place that is using this technology and you could get into that place and work with them. I would also tell, like you mentioned already taking a class or getting a certification.
You mentioned our class. We have an Intro to Power Apps course.
Intro to Power Apps, yep. The getting a Microsoft certification, the best way on a resume to get somebody to go, oh, I see you don't have experience, but I'm going to trust that you know what you're doing. Those certifications can be very helpful. They're expensive, they're time consuming, there's a lot to them. But just the certification you have right now would be like, I would consider you qualified to get a job doing Dynamics work, right? Like you should have a basic understanding of, a number of the functional areas of Dynamics, and I would consider you to be hireable for those things. Whether or not it's the position that you're looking for, I don't know. I don't know that I would consider it to be a Dynamics developer, that course in particular. But for sure, like I wouldn't, like Mike said, I wouldn't wait. And I think, if you've already gotten that certification and already done those things, you already have some skills that are very valuable.
All right, we've got some more questions. One from Samantha, looking for the best process or application to obtain an Excel chart format into a calendar used for viewing on a SharePoint site. So the example, person one does something at time A and to be posted at this date on an on-call calendar. I don't know if I quite understand the question. Samantha, you might try clarifying that.
She has can you edit the Excel and allows the following to link or update, or would you require the update directly in this application?
So I'm going to try to interpret. Samantha, you can clarify if you'd like to. She has an Excel file. She wants to update a row in the Excel file and make something happen on a SharePoint site. So add an event to a calendar maybe, or add something to a list based on that. If that's the case, I would probably use Power Automate to monitor that Excel file.
On change.
On change, look for and then process the rows in that Excel file. You're, of course, going to need well-formatted data to do that. But then assuming the data is well-formatted, you should be able to bring that data in and then do whatever you need to do with it, put it in SharePoint or somewhere else.
So I hate dealing with Excel. So I would immediately say, don't do it in Excel and do it in a SharePoint list, and then from the SharePoint list trigger and go do something else.
Something else, right?
But I think you're right. You can for sure do it from Excel to make that work if you need to. Hopefully that answered it. If not, like we said, give us a little more detail and we can help.
All right, Christina has a question about theming in the app on start. She sets the button font, label font, etc. However, she needs to set the property every time she adds a button or label. Is there a way to set it across the board, or is it a font property can be set like that?
That's a great question, and it's unfortunately a difficult one to answer in a way that would be helpful. So generally speaking, Microsoft is terrible at doing a theme within Power Apps, Canvas apps. You're speaking specifically about a Canvas app. In model-driven apps, you don't need a theme because they don't give you a choice. You just get what you get and don't pitch a fit. But in Canvas apps, you have options to change formats of things. Out of the box, standard, there is no way to do what you're asking about. That is not possible.
So the workarounds that we've seen for that, one is like the theme template that's out there,
yep.
Right? That you can go download, and then when you add, like within the context of that theme template, you can like make modifications to it, and then when you add buttons, they take on the theme that's applied. The other workaround that I've used is if you've got a button and it's themed, colored the way you want it to be,
copy paste it.
Just copy paste it.
Yeah, so what a large number of people do, that like what Mike was saying, there's two options that people take. One is they create oftentimes one or multiple pages in their app, and those pages have basically they theme it to how they want, and they configure all of the settings for all of the buttons and everything else the way they want. And then whenever they want to create a new gallery, a new button, a new anything, they copy from that sheet or that screen and paste it into the screen they want, which, as you can imagine, is not super great, but it works. It is better than nothing.
It saves you some time.
Yeah, it's better than nothing. The theme template, which is what Mike was talking about, there's a couple different people who've done it. Microsoft actually produced and produce some content around it. It basically requires you to have started from a good starting point. And so, long story short, what it does is you actually have a custom themed application that you start from. And so anytime you want to create a new app, you open that app or this theme app and then use that app as the starting point. And when you do that, it has some custom code within in the template to automatically use variables that get set in the onStart. And it works good. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Probably the biggest challenges with it is even in the latest versions that have been produced, it doesn't really cover all of the. It either covers too much. So, like, I only want to mess with the button color and the font, but there are now 7,000 different settings that I can configure, or it doesn't have enough because the thing you want to set is something that somebody hasn't customized the template to do what you want it to do. And so it's just a challenge because Microsoft is not providing something out of the box. I don't know exactly why they haven't provided something out of the box. I think they could provide something out of the box, but they just haven't. So unfortunately, that's your best options. We have some resources that we probably can provide about a little bit about those things, but
It sounds like she's already using the template.
oh, you're using the template.
Yep. So she loves it.
Oh, that was Christina. But so then if you were using the template, it should just automatically, like, whenever you add a new button, it should use that value that you're setting on the onStart. Are you saying that it's not?
Maybe she has to run out onStart.
Yeah, maybe.
Take
Yeah.
effect.
However, I need to set the property every time I add a button or label, etc.
Wasn't font not included in the theme template?
Oh, in our latest version of the theme template, probably it's very possible. The theme template that we have on our website is old, like it's behind the times. We actually had a little bit of some work to update it, but honestly, it's a lot of work. It's a challenge to keep maintained, but yes, I don't believe the font is something that you can use.
She's confirming. All right. Another question. Yeah. This is a good one. SharePoint list containing 100,000 items. Can I use a gallery to implement a repeating row in a Canvas app without performance issues if I manage the delegation properly?
Yes.
Maybe. I don't know.
No, you can, for sure. But the question is
there's
the
still
delegation.
A limitation on the number of rows that you can pull in, right?
No, by default,
if you just connect it directly to the list.
Yeah, if you just connect it directly to the list, and you don't have any things that if you're connecting it directly to the list and you don't have something that requires delegation, then Power Apps will automatically paginate it, and you're only going to get 100 rows at a time or whatever it is, and you'll keep scrolling down, and when you scroll down, you'll get a few more.
Yep, and he's also saying that he wants to manage access to those items using SharePoint groups for each of the rows. So
scroll up. We have there's a number of things.
It's right
no,
there.
But there's another. Oh, it's got both.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't because it's ... So can I use a gallery to implement a repeating row in my Canvas app?
That's the same as the question above. He just added to it. I'll need to manage access using SharePoint groups.
I know, but it cuts at it without ... See that?
Without performance issues if I manage the delegation properly.
No, that's what I was trying to just make sure I got it all. Implementing a repeating row in my Canvas app. Gallery to implement a repeating row. Yes. Okay. So that top one is generally speaking yes. I will need to manage access using SharePoint groups for both the main item and for each row.
I think it should work. Right?
I don't know what he means by main item and each row. That's what's got me.
Multiple lists.
Which one has 100,000 items? Both?
Yeah, so if the second list has 100,000 items and you're then filtering it based on the selection in the first list.
Yeah, I don't know. Like,
then you may have delegation issues that you can't get around.
Maybe. Yeah, and more than that, so the other thing is that when you have 100,000 rows, you can't do item level permission the same way you can do otherwise because there's limits. Well, eventually, Microsoft stops you in the UI from doing certain things. I can't remember what the number is. It might be at 500,000, not 100,000. But I know when you get to a very large number, you can't do item level permissions. In addition, doing 100,000 items, not documents, where documents you could put them in folders naturally, and that kind of separates things. Not doing that in items is just problematic in general.
Invoice is the main item, products are the rows, so it's an invoicing, it's a billing scenario.
And which one has 100,000 rows?
Products,
right?
I'm sure.
But 100,000 products could be.
I'm assuming by
invoice?
products he means line items on an invoice.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really depends. Like we were just talking about, I think it's possible, but you would have to really be incredibly careful.
To me, it sounds like a great opportunity for Dataverse.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. Is usually when somebody asks this type of question, I'm like, you should use Dataverse.
All right. So next question.
Can you just
Anya, I think it's
copy-
related to a previous one.
Yeah.
Can you copy, reuse one instead of inserting? So that's related to the theming,
Which
right?
the truth is, yes, you can copy, reuse one instead of inserting. Yep.
And then she wants to connect Office 365 groups to pull in a list of names for a gallery and then exclude herself, supervisor, and direct reports, if any. Is this possible?
100%.
Yep, I think it is possible. Like I've done similar things to this where you can pull those people into a collection, and then you can filter that collection and create a filtered collection and simply remove the users that you want from it. That would be probably my first attempt at it.
And you can get direct reports out of the Office 365 users connector. I don't understand exactly what's myself and supervisor. I don't know whether or not that means you, Tanya, or filter out the person who's running the app and their supervisor.
Yeah, the user.
Yeah.
The user. Yeah, because you don't want to pick yourself.
Yep. Yeah, you can definitely do that.
I can't get it to work.
Can't get,
I can't get the filter stuff to work. So
you can't get the filter to filter down.
And the gallery or the collection that I'm making, it creates a value column and then it adds a whole bunch of blank columns for every other user component question out there, and I don't know why.
Yep.
So I just didn't know if I was doing something like completely the wrong
So I would
thought process.
Yeah, given this scenario, like we are limited on time, but I would break it down into get my list of users, like my full list of users. I would say get a list of myself, get a list of my supervisor. So like create collections of users that you want to exclude. So you could easily add yourself, like your email address, for example, to a collection.
I have that. Yep, I have that collection working.
Then look up your supervisor based on who self is, add their email to that collection. Then look up direct reports, if there are any, and add them to that same collection. And then you basically want to exclude anyone from the first collection who's in the second collection. And you could do the match based on email address. That's the approach that I would probably take.
Yeah, I'll keep trying. Thanks.
And if you're having problems where it's creating columns or that it's not matching right, many times it's a problem with, I found that it's a problem with understanding what the data really looks like, which oftentimes using the tooltip in the formula bar can be helpful in figuring that out. Maybe that's not your problem, I don't know. But using that tooltip to kind of look at the data the results can be very, very helpful.
We can make a note of this question too, and it could be something we can have maybe a functional example next month.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that wraps us up for today. Thank you all for bringing so many questions to us. Kept Matt and Mike here busy. I wanted to say I did leave a link a little bit up in the chat to give us a shout out if we were helpful to you today. We'd love to hear from you and collect those because we'd love to build this community and just make everything bigger, better, and keep things going. So yeah, thanks for joining. I put a link to November office hours out there as well, so feel free to register. Otherwise, we will see you in a month.